This conference will now be recorded.
Hi all, welcome to Aviraj Pega Trainings. So next frequent asked questions. So what is the difference between a screen flow and a process flow? So primarily we need to discuss about the differences that we observe while we are doing the development. And of course, we need to make a note of this. What is the primary difference between a screen flow and a process flow? So first of all, screen flow doesn't allow you to do any routings. So there are no routings that can be done in between while we are navigating from one smart shape to another smart shape. So that means even if you have an assignment to do, so all the assignments that are available in a screen flow should be done only by a single operator. But whereas if you go to the process flow, you have an option to do the routing. So each and every assignment which is present in the process flow, you have an option to do the routing. You need to configure the routing, who has to do the particular assignment. Okay, so this is a major primary and the first difference that we need to say in the interviews. So now coming to the designer studio. So let's go to the case type. So here in Pega 8.6 by default, if you are opening a case and if you open the initialization stage, that means, so if you go to the initialization stage, this is a stage which is always using the screen flow. Okay, so first default screen that is going to come from the process. So this process is treated as a screen flow. So here, as and when we create and define a initialization stage and configure a step in our case type using App Studio. All right, so in the case designer, you can see this automatically creates a screen flow. But whereas if you are going through a process flow, if you are going to the primary stages, it comes as a process flow. Okay, so here initially you can see there is a phase called initialization stage which is introduced in 8.5. okay, but whereas the primary stages are available since earlier Pega 7 onwards. Okay, so all the stages, whatever the steps that we configure, the business flow that we configure, it usually take the primary stages. So we have to do explicitly creating a screen flow if you are using prior to 8.5 version. But from 8.5 onwards, so we have this initialization stage, and as and when we configure it, it automatically creates a screen flow for us. All right, now what is the major difference between the screen flow and the process flow? Now coming to this flow, so here if you see the flow that is having an assignment, and if you double click on this assignment, so here you see there is an action called flow action. There is an actions defined, and that rule is called as a flow action rule. Okay, so it is going to take the input as a flow action parameter on the assignment shape. Okay, so on the assignment properties, you can see this action. All right, whereas if I go and create a process flow, so let me create it from the case designer. And if I configure a step, okay, so I'm adding a step called approval case and just save this. So by default, the primary stages, it is going to create a process flow. The steps that we configure, it is going under the process flow. So if I open this process, so this is the process flow, and if I add an assignment shape over here, and if I link up this particular assignment, Okay, so if I link up this assignment, so you can see there is an option called routing available for us since it is a process flow. Okay, but whereas in the screen flow, we doesn't have this option available for us. Now, where do you define the action in case of process flow? So you need to have a flow action defined, but where are we defining that flow actions? So flow actions we are going to define on the connector coming out of the assignment shape. So this is the place where we need to define. Okay, so this is a place where we have to define the flow action. So the connector coming out of the assignment shape is the place where we need to define the flow action in case of a process flow. But whereas if you are in the screen flow, we have to define the flow action on the assignment shape itself. Okay, and there is no option called routing available on it. Okay, so this we need to remember. Now where are we going to route it in case of screen flow? So in case of screen flow, if you open the start shape, so we have the option available to whom we need to route it. So here you can see there's an option called routing available on the start shape. So all the sequence of assignments should be done by the same operator whom we are routed to. So in case of screen flow, the routing happens on the start shape. So all the assignments, even if you have multiple assignments, let's say you have 3 assignments, so all these 3 assignments should be done by the same operator who has assigned, who has given the name in the start shape. So whatever the routing which is defined on the start shape, so that person is responsible to complete all the assignments on this screen flow. But whereas for the process flow, we doesn't have that routing option available on the start shape. So if you see the start shape in the process flow, we doesn't have any routing action available over here. All right, hope you're clear so far. So this is the first thing that we need to tell. And now coming to the harnesses defined on the start shape of the screen flow. So if you see the collection or the sequence of steps that has to be performed by the same operator, so that option should be have a go back and forth options. So in case of screen flow, you need to have an option to come back and forth. Okay, so primarily the design for the screen flow is defined for the screens where the same person is responsible to complete all the sequence of inputs. All right, all the sequence of assignments to be done by the same operator. That kind of functionality we are going to incorporate it by using the screen flow. So here comes, let's say if you have another assignment which is to capture, all right, so now coming to this, so I'm going to have a assignment to add employment details. Okay, and there is another assignment which I'm going to update, add address. Okay, so this is something like I'm going to add the address. Okay, I'm just using the default flow action here. All right, so I'm going to add this employment details as well as address by using a screen flow. Okay, so now I need to define the harness as well. So here we have multiple options using the custom policy, or we can use some standard harnesses such as tabbed screen flow 7. So this is one of the harness that can be consumed for the screen flow. And now if I save it, and if I navigate to my case designer and run this, I just need to save it once again. just refresh this. All right, so since I have an assignment here under this approval underscore flow, all right, so now I do have a screen flow defined under the create stage and a process flow defined under the approval stage. And now if I run this, so you can see here we have the create, where under the create stage we have add employment details and adding the address. So you can see this, you have an option to continue. So let's say you are in the address field and still you doesn't you have entered some wrong employment details, so you still have that option to go back and update the employment details and come back again. Okay, so this is the usage that we see. This is the main power of using the screen flow. So you have an option to go back and forth in order to update your details, and the final finish which is available, so that is something it is going to completely move out of the stage. So once you are moved out of the stage, you doesn't have that option to go back, as like you see the cancel and back option available on the screen flow. Okay, so this is this is how you can use the screen flow if in case you have updated your harness to something else. So you can see a different type of screen. So now I have changed the harness, and now if I switch or if I create a new case, you can see the difference. So you can see the tree displays on the hierarchical way, where you can see the adding the employment details, or you can switch to add address. Okay, so this way we can update the employment details and add address, and you can switch back and forth. And once you are done with your screen flow, just click on create so that it is assigned to the next person. All right, so now it is routed, it has to route it to the next flow, which is your process flow, and for that there is an assign to option available that should be configured. So here in our scenario we haven't given any routing. Okay, so we should specify a routing option. So let's say if I specify the operator @gmail.com. Okay, and now if I click on create, this field may not be blank. I think I need to add certain details over here, but primarily the process flow doesn't require any harnesses to be defined on the start shift. So you can see the start shift doesn't allow you, there is no option of harnesses available. All right, and now coming to the restrictions of the smart shapes. So there are certain smart shapes that are restricted in your screen flow. Okay, so now if you see the smart shapes by right clicking, you can see there are split for each is the only smart shape available from the advanced smart shapes. Okay, whereas if you see the process flow, you have the all the options available under the advanced shapes. You can see there is a certain options available except split for each. The rest of all the options are not are restricted in the screen flow. Okay, so only split for each is the only smart shape that is allowed in our screen flows. Okay, and now coming to the automations, all these options are available even on our screen flow. So you can say only the split for each is the only smart shape from the advanced smart shapes which is supported in the screen flow from the process flow. All right, and there are no local actions calls can be done in assignment. So if you go to the assignment in the screen flow, and you can see there are no local actions defined over here. Okay, so there is no option available to call the local actions, but whereas if you go to the process flow, you have the options to call the local actions. So you can simply define certain local actions. Okay, so all the flow action, all the local actions that we define, it displays under the actions. So let's say add attachments is one of the local action, and if I want to run this, let me complete this ad hoc processes. I'm going to remove this assignment for some time since I need to configure otherwise. Okay, so you are going to the process flow where this approval is made. So this is an assignment which you see. This is a test assignment which you see over here. Okay, and now this is having the actions available. So you can see under the actions, you have certain options available. Okay, so the local action called add attachments is available for us to do the adding of attachments. Okay, so this way we can add the local actions for the process flow. All right, so these are the primarily the major differences between a screen flow and the process flow. But how can you determine whether the flow is screen flow or a process flow? By looking into it this way. So you can see on the process tab, sorry, design tab. So we have a option category called flow standard. Okay, so if it is flow standard, this is called as the standard flow, which is a process flow. But whereas if you go to this design tab for the screen flow, you have a category called screen flow. Okay, so this way you can determine whether the flow is a screen flow or a process flow. All right, and last but not the least, while we are defining the process screen flow explicitly, you can define it via the process category. And if you go to the flow, and you have the view additional configuration options available. So you can define that if you select the standard template for the screen flow, this determines the flow is created for as a screen flow category. All right, so if by default if it is not selected, and it is the process flow it creates. All right, I hope you understood. Thanks everyone.